Thank you very much, Mercy. And it's just so exciting to be here. I've really enjoyed this morning. I'm slightly concerned about my talk because I feel a little bit of an interloper. Evidence for Better Lives does have an Africa connection, but it's slightly indirect. And also, I was not the founding father of Evidence for Better Lives. So I'm talking on behalf of a large number of people. In particular, Manuel Eisner, who really did lead it getting going, but these are just some of the names, so that you know that this isn't just me at all. So, what is Evidence for Better Lives? How do I make it move forward? Is it the clicker?
The arrow on there.
The arrow. Yeah, that's what I'm pressing.
It's just not
I'm just pressing on there. All right, so just to give you a little bit of background, oops, now I've got to go backwards. Yeah, okay, so I probably am preaching to the choir here. I really don't need to explain why it's important to focus on the early years, the intensive period, and the kind of lifelong impact that early experiences can have. So the original driving motivation for setting up Evidence for Better Lives, because Manuel Eisner from the Institute of Criminology was very much focused on violence against children right from the get-go. And I'm not going to be really talking about that very much today, but so that you can see that that's the overall arching aim. And obviously connected with initiatives like Inspire, it's very much kind of a global issue. I'm really not doing very well with the so we know that violence against children is a problem that can be remediated. You can intercept cycles of violence. There are treatments and support interventions that you can do, to the extent that that's why it became one of the kind of 2015 Sustainable Developmental Goals. Arguably, when you're thinking about violence, people often think about teen violence, youth violence, but actually violence against children begins even before they're born. So thinking about intimate partner violence in pregnancy. And we know that all of these problems become more entrenched over time, and they become more pervasive over time. And so there's lots of very good reasons why one should be focusing on the very early years. Okay, so in particular, this idea of developmental cascades that you can divert. So I think Kathy was talking about her interest being in healthy trajectories. It's all about how do you shift from a negative trajectory to a positive trajectory through these different cascades. So if left untreated, these early risk factors tend to accumulate and escalate, but early prevention can lead to self-reinforcing positive developmental cascades, and that's very much the goal. So there are three main components to the Evidence for Better Lives study. The first of these was about research on child development. So I'm trying to think where she is. There was somebody in our group, was it Zana, who was saying that she had a researcher in Uganda, was it? Who,
different, yeah.
Different person, but anyway, it's not globally recognized as a respectable field of study, early childhood development. You're either in medicine or you're in education or you're kind of in one of the clear STEM things. So there is a need to highlight the importance of research on child development as a potential source for knowledge that can actually lead to meaningful policy change. And that leads to the second point, the notion of impact. So from the very get-go, the Evidence for Better Lives study was designed to work with medium cities, with collaborators who were themselves very much in the implementation science end of things in terms of their own expertise. And a really nice example of this was Valenzuela in the Philippines, which became a pathfinder city in the efforts against violence as a result of the Evidence for Better Lives study. Capacity building. This has turned out to be one of the really positive outcomes of the Evidence for Better Lives study. Just bringing together this network of people that I'll be describing in a moment really helped to create a kind of peer support network across different countries, so that there was that expertise on hand. Regular Zoom meetings meant that it was just a whole lot easier to if you like, fess up for things that you don't know about. You know, there is that sense of putting on a front and wanting to impress, and you really need a kind of relationship of trust where you can acknowledge that, you know, here's something I'm really good at, but I really need somebody to help me understand this bit of the protocol or this bit of the analysis or whatever. And so that's been really one of the positive things that's come out of the Evidence for Better Lives. So if I just describe, so I'm talking now about the foundation study. The goal is eventually to create a much bigger version. And in some ways, the EBLS foundation study, it really was conceived of as a pilot study, but it was such an ambitious pilot study that we decided to call it a foundation study because it kind of acknowledging what it was doing on itself. So the goal was to have between 5 and 8 sites in all major cultures across the world. Ultimately, we weren't able to get South America for various sorts of practical logistical reasons, to try and enable consensus around methodology and sampling and measurement so that you genuinely could have comparisons of data across sites. So there was a little bit of wiggle room for each site to bring in some of their extra areas of interest and expertise, but the core protocol was very much the same across the sites. We have this geographical focus on medium-sized cities. That's partly to do with cities being where there's more violence perhaps than in rural areas, but also where there's the infrastructure for support for making a difference. So the goal for the foundation study was to get 150 unborn children at the recruitment stage. We weren't specifying firstborn. These could be families who had other children. And the data collection started in the last trimester of pregnancy, and there was a follow-up in sort of postnatal and an unfunded follow-ups at 18 months and then at 30 months during the pandemic. And that unfunded nature, that really was a testament to the kind of level of peer collaboration and support that there was that kind of commitment and goodwill from all the sites to make this happen. So here are the sites you can see. So Jamaica, Ghana, originally South Africa, but for various, I think, reasons of to do with the hazardous nature of data collection in some of the areas that they weren't able to continue. Romania, and that was partly to do with one of the funders was linked to Romania. They're now not a lower middle income site. I think Romania has just been defined recently as high income. Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, and the Philippines. So really a very diverse network of people, and diverse in disciplinary backgrounds as well as in geographical and cultural backgrounds. So I've said all of that before. So this is just to demonstrate the diversity across all these sites, because I think there is a tendency, we're moving away from dichotomies like weird, non-weird, but a perception that, say, lower middle income sites are all going to have the same problems. So clearly they're not. And this was part of sort of demonstrating that. So you can see that, so the figures in red are exposure to violence as a child. So that's 3/4 of kids in Kingston, but only a third in Vietnam, say. So really very different levels across site. Likewise, for neighbourhood violence and intimate partner violence in pregnancy, almost 50% in 3 of the sites, and then much less in some of the other sites. So there's a lot of variability across the sites, and obviously that's really helpful in terms of understanding to what extent mechanisms might be universal or not. So what I want to do for the remaining few minutes that I've got is just to talk about 2 of the many measures that we've been developing as part of the Evidence for Better Lives. So the first one is about perinatal depression and stress, and here this is work that Laura Kattas has played a lead role in, and I want to refer to this because one of the challenges, I said we were using the same measures across many different cultures. Of course, that raises questions that we've been talking about earlier. Are these measures actually conceptually equivalent? Can you say that they're measuring the same thing in the same way? So one of the first challenges we've had is to do measurement invariance analyses, and that's one of the things that Laura has been able to do. So focusing on perinatal depression and stress, we know that postnatal depression does affect almost 1/5 of new mothers globally, and that's probably likely to be a higher proportion in lower middle income countries, but oftentimes it goes unseen because it's unmeasured, because there aren't necessarily those tools there. So that was one of the contributions we were hoping to make through the Evidence for Better Lives, was to actually demonstrate the utility of standardized measures. Okay, so this is again to show you, like exposure to violence, that maternal mental health really varied across sites. And what Laura's been able to show with the perceived stress scale is that it shows measurement in variance both across sites and across birth parity. And so even though it's been translated into many different languages and contexts, it does appear to be something that you can use and interpret in the same way. So I'm just jumping over the findings from that to show that there was the measurement in variance. And more stress reported by mothers who already had children, understandably. You know, they're double challenging. Okay, so for my last minute, I just want to bring you to perhaps what's been one of my contributions to the Evidence Better Life study, and that's to break away from standardized questionnaires. To at the last wave at 30 months, we actually decided we'd have a go at listening to the women themselves talking about their children, so that we could hear the voices of the participants. And so we did this through an adaptation of the 5-minute speech sample, the 3-minute speech sample, because we weren't sure that we'd be able to get people to talk for as much as 5 minutes. We know that, so I've been using 5-minute speech sample a lot to measure my mindedness, which is the capacity of mothers or parents to tune into their child's thoughts and feelings, which seems to predict executive functions, social competencies, all kinds of things, but we know it varies across cultures. And so I just want to leave you with some of the opening statements we've been getting from Ghana, to give you an idea of what kinds of things they're saying. So they were all able pretty much to talk for 3 minutes, and they vary a lot in what they're saying. So some of them will start with a general comment about the child or their relationship with the child. So you can see that these are, I mean, they sound Ghanaian to me. So some of these things, they're not what you get from a British respectful. I don't think I've heard that about a 30-month-old before. And they also vary in valence. So some of them are very positive. Interesting that you get quite a few references to God. You know, I wanted a boy, God gave me a girl. These are not things that we'd have got necessarily from a British one, but also some elements of concern about health issues that we wouldn't necessarily get in this country as well. And so in thinking about how we might take this forward, other than just looking at my mindedness, I found this paper from an Indian study of an intervention, a parenting intervention for children with autism. And what they were able to show was variability within that sample in terms of what the parents were talking about, that were linked largely to demographic factors. So I think that's kind of interesting, whether you'd get that same demographic distribution across the different sites. So the plan is to take my mindedness, expressed emotion, perhaps coherence, and look at whether they're universal or site-specific in terms of their links with maternal risk exposure and child outcomes. And just to leave you with some sort of thinking about paths going, maybe future grants, future ideas for research. So coming back to this Indian study, they were able to show changes after the intervention in terms of how the parents perceive their child with autism, with less sort of focus on some of the problems and more thinking about the future and growth and change. And so that's a really positive thing. So I'm really hoping that this might open up an opportunity, because it's a really low-cost thing to do. You don't need a lot of training to get a 3-minute speech sample from people, and it'd be really interesting to see how it might be used across other sites. Okay, thank you very much.